finally, I can sit here and say that I'm reviewing God of War Ragnarok for the PlayStation 5, developed by Santa Monica and published by PlayStation. Let's get on with the review. What's going on, you guys? Lord Ad here, coming at you with another review. You guys obviously know what I'm about to review. I'm about to review God of War Ragnarok. You guys know that, it's been a very anticipated game for a lot of variety of reasons. I would say that the success of the 2018 one, which I did review on my channel, so you can go look at that if you guys want to. So there's a lot going on in this game. I came into this with pretty above expectations. I'll actually say that myself. I really expected this game to really hit out of the park. The question is, did it hit out of the park? I'm going to be reviewing this off of gameplay, story, performance, and obviously gameplay again, because you guys know how I love gameplay. So let's talk about the story of God of War. Pretty much it's a continuation of 2018. I would say this is mainly focusing on Atreus this time and not much of Kratos, which that was a little bit of the focus in the 2018 version. I actually don't mind this for the most part. There are a couple nitpicks that I do have that I'll save for a little bit later on in the video, but they do a good job explaining Atreus. They do a really good job with his character development. I felt like character development in this game was very well done, especially Kratos. There's a lot of aspects that people don't like when it comes to Kratos in the 2018, where they feel like the older Kratoses would never turn into the current Kratos, and I'm not one of those people. I feel like if you want to do something different with God of War, you're gonna have to change drastic characteristics of Kratos. And to me, a battled veteran that's went through wars multiple times, went through his own personal hells multiple times, and has died multiple times in the original games of God of War, would make sense that once he found something that he wants, he's gonna grab onto it and hold on to it. And that's what happened when he met Atreus' mother, and that's what happened when he eventually had Atreus itself. And that's why I feel like it makes sense that a little bit of that hardened shell that he has would slowly start to come down, because he spent all of those years in the original God of Wars avenging his family's death. So to me, when he was able to establish some form of that feeling, of that world back into him, he would do the exact same thing he did back then, which was try to remain it, because he knows what happens if he goes too much on this adventure when it comes to vengeance, and he doesn't want that for his son. He's seen multiple times over and over again how bad things can get, and he knows for a fact that, look, I'm in this foreign land, I've been here for a while, I'm trying to raise my kid, and I'm trying to atone to some form of the past me, of the past Kratos. And when he met Faye, it seems like she was able to break down some of those walls, those internal struggles that he had. And don't get it twisted, that old Kratos is still there. There are a couple times in the game where you see it come back out, but Kratos has done everything in his power to make sure he does not pass that hate, that vengeance soul of his to his son. And I think that is the character development in itself. I can actually say one of the biggest things I really enjoyed about God of War Ragnarok was the acknowledgement of the original trilogy. Now, I have my own knacks that I felt like they should be a little bit more story opportunities going that happen between the original games and these new reboots, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I really enjoyed going around seeing the banter between the story members and exactly some of the stuff that Kratos did. Because when Mimir and all of them are talking about the events of God of War 2, it's nice to see that that is a rumor back then. Like, there's some things that they talk about that Mimir himself is like, Kratos, is this true? Because this seems far-fetched. And Kratos is like, yeah, I did that. I shouldn't have did that, but I totally did that. And the banter between these characters is something I don't normally see in these type of games. I really enjoy that they acknowledge the original games. They were pretty much Easter eggs, where when you're sitting there going through that and you hear these conversations, you can't help to have a smile, be like, I remember playing that, man. And that is a really good attention to detail that I feel like a lot of you are going to appreciate. Now let's talk a little bit about the performance and graphics. The performance of this, I played it on the PlayStation 5. It was was phenomenal for the most part. No real big issues. I didn't have no dropouts, no frame rate drops, nothing like that. The game, to my knowledge, I don't think crashed one time. Now, obviously, there are occasions where these PlayStation games and Xbox games and PC games, they crash. It doesn't really matter what type of patch is out there, what type of final build. Sometimes the system itself just, let's go back to the main menu. But I want us to say the PlayStation 5 ran this very well. It didn't really run too hot. Now, I did play it digitally. I don't know what the PlayStation 4 edition of this is. I did play on the performance mode. I don't really care about that graphic stuff or the fidelity of the screen. I want the frame rates to go more because this is like more of an action-packed game. But I can say on the PlayStation 5 in performance mode, you should have no issues. In terms of the artwork, how the graphics itself is, I will say that there is clearly an upgrade from the 2018 version, but I see a lot of people acting like it's like huge grips, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I don't agree with that on its own. I feel like there's certain aspects of this game that looks way better than 2018. For instance, I felt like some of the animations looked a lot better. Felt like some of the effects like fire, water, that looked better, especially the frost on the blade looked pretty clean, especially on the PlayStation 5. I just feel like the overall art style and the graphics itself didn't look drastically better. Clearly, the majority of the map is frozen over in God of War Ragnarok, and when it comes to Midgar, that is. In the original one, it definitely wasn't frozen over. There is lore behind the reason that all of Midgar is frozen. I thought that was really interesting. I hope you guys enjoy that. But for the most part, the game looks phenomenal, runs great. I don't think you guys are gonna have too many issues with that. I think I'm gonna put this in there because it is part of the graphics. Come on, Sony, PlayStation, St. Monica, like, where's the gore in this game? Some of the animations are pretty good, and I will say it's better than the 2018 counterpart when it comes to gore, but I want that old God of War 3 back when you rip people's heads off and you rip people's limbs off and hit them with the limb. I feel like that's absent in this. Now, I know that we live in a different world than we lived back in. Maybe that's too violent for today's society, but I do feel like if you want God of War to come back to its true, that gore gotta be there. And you guys know, everyone that played the old God of Wars, you guys know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of sexual stuff that's not in this game that was in the previous ones, and I'm not saying that's necessary. It's probably not necessary, but all that stuff together in a pot made it feel more adult-like. Now, I'm not saying this game don't feel like adult-like. There's still a lot of gore in this game, but I guess my stance in general would be, look, with the fighting going on when it comes to gore, it's a fraction, a shadow, a shell of its former self when it comes to that. A lot of, the sexual activity has been brought down to a minimum. There's not really any of that, and it's like I said, it's not necessarily need to be there, but all that together made it feel more of a mature game. It's still a mature game. There's still a lot going on, but I feel like, if you do another one, if you're able to, bring some of that back, especially the gore, man. I think everyone here that's played the original God of Wars knows that gore is one of the key components to a God of War game. So if we make more, just try to implement a little bit more of that into it. Let's get into gameplay, because you guys know how I feel about gameplay. I enjoy gameplay, and I honestly say that the combat system on here is pretty much almost identical to the 2018 combat. There are times where the camera is annoying, especially when they're wanting you to do a lot of traversal. There is a lot more of that. You feel like you have multiple areas to fight in, especially for the harder difficulties. I beat the difficulty before the hardest difficulty. I don't know exactly what the name of that was, but I did enjoy the fact that if things were going wrong, I had the ability to climb or go down levels, to be able to restructure myself, to be able to see exactly who I'm fighting. Sometimes they would outnumber me, and I like the fact that they've gave you diverse in gameplay in anything you really want to do. They've put elements on just about any weapon you could think of. The blades have fire, this axe has ice. I do enjoy this. I enjoy the way the combat system worked in this game, especially with the RPG system. It just made it feel a lot more like an RPG on top of having a phenomenal story. There are certain parts of God of War that kind of like annoyed me a little bit. Now, I wouldn't necessarily want to take points about it, but I do want to let you guys know there are nitpicks that I got on it. There is a certain part in the game where you start, traveling around with actual gods. I'm sure some of you have seen them in the trailer, and you see them vividly and just clearly jumping up giant mountains. They don't really take any kind of chains or anything like that, and you don't see Kratos doing this. And I know they do it because they want to, they gotta ground him a little bit in order to make gameplay that makes sense. Because if Kratos was able to do these things that he does in the cutscenes or, you know, the animations, then obviously the gameplay itself would be hard. But it kind of like takes you a little bit out of the immersion when you are stronger than most of these people and they're doing more than you are. And I think that's the biggest thing that had an issue with the immersion. Now, like I said, I know all that's done for gameplay issues, and I don't want any of you to defer not playing this game because of that. That's going to have to be happen. That's one of the reasons I feel like Superman hasn't really had too many iterations of that character in games, because that type of gameplay is hard to make. And I feel like the same thing goes here. Sure, you're a god, but what are you really supposed to do if you could kill everyone in one hit? You got to ground that character down to a certain degree. But I feel like, you know, especially the traversal stuff, let me jump over mountains or something, man. Let me feel like a god sometimes, because sometimes you feel like an actual mortal, not a god, like the God of War. And obviously he threw that name back a long time ago, but it's just like, you still have these godlike powers. You're a demigod. You should be able to have more traversal when it comes to jumping over little cliffs and stuff. I know that's a little small, and I know I shouldn't be annoyed by that, but I don't know why. It just frustrated me the more and more I saw these people doing these traversals, and I'm sitting there have to rely on freezing stuff. I know it's for puzzles, and you know, considering the puzzles were pretty much the exact same thing. It's like, push this here, or freeze this here, or catch this on fire. You know, I was tired of the puzzles like 20-30 minutes into the game. I don't know why they ain't fixed some of these puzzles. These are the exact mechanics that was used in 2018, and it's kind of frustrating that they're still in this game. But let's talk about boss battles in general. You know, first off, let's hit the elephant in the room. The biggest issue and the biggest critique I personally had for God of War 2018 was the implementation of how many trolls was put in that game. It used to be that, you know, you would see a certain boss rewash, but that particular game, they reused that troll 20-30 times. It felt like it was like that troll was at the end of every dungeon. That troll was at the end of every story element that wasn't the main element. I'm gonna actually say that they took that criticism very well. Sure, there was opportunities where I felt like they could have been a little bit more creative than just, you know, taking a skeleton and giving him fire powers and naming him some weird thing and say that's a boss. Now, they could have did more on that, but as far as like the different variety of enemies, the different variety of bosses, I will say that they improved on that. Now, as far as the big boss battles, you know, the fighting the gods of the Nords or anything related to have any form of power, something that you would get that Zeus feeling from in the original God of Wars, that Poseidon feeling from, I'll actually say that there are good capabilities and fights in this game, and you will get that sensation that serious stuff is going down. But I can't honestly say that I was impressed by it. Now, I felt like they did better than 2018 for the most part. The only real big battles is like the dragon, you fought the stranger a couple times, and that was pretty much it. This game, it is a long game. It is about 30 hours, and in the 30 hours, there's probably a good 6, maybe 7 fights. And I know there's some stuff in the side missions that I haven't got to yet, and I got to a lot of them. But as far as like the main bosses, there are some that are hit, there are some that's a miss, but I feel like they did enough here to satisfy me. Now, if they make another one, I want them to focus more on the boss battles, because I think what makes God of War is that gore, is that M-rated gore, that destroy all things gore, that rip people to shreds gore, that boss battle where, you know, you come up to Hercules and you take his own weapons and bash his skull in. That is what makes God of War to me. And I feel like this is God of War, but it's downplayed a lot, significantly. And maybe it's a lot to do with, you know, budgeting. I know that some of these big AAA battles in the type of style that God of War is currently going into, so maybe that takes a little bit of time, but they did a decent job. It's like I said, I wouldn't say it's phenomenal or anything like that. When it comes to the story in turns, there were a couple bosses towards the end of the game that I was a little disappointed with, that I felt like they built up anticipation to fight them and it just wasn't caught up what it was to be. You know, I think that this is a good direction for God of War. I don't know where they're going to go next with this, but I'm kind of curious to see exactly what the feedback they took from this game when they're making the next one. Because like I said, this is a good game, guys. You know, they took a lot of the feedback that the community gave them, and there was a lot of feedback. You know, there was a huge thing on the bosses. People weren't feeling that the stranger and the dragon was like one of the key boss fights in the original God of War. They gave us a lot more of that. Like I said, I would appreciate more like phase boss fights where you change location. There was a particular one where you fought in pretty much their version of hell. That was a really nice boss fight. I really enjoyed that. I just want more of that. That's all. I just want more fights, and maybe it's because they don't have access to the amount of gods that Greek mythology had. I don't know much about Norse mythology if they have the amount of gods that Greek mythology has, but they had a lot to work with in Greek mythology when it comes to the original God of Wars. And maybe it's because they're rushing these with just 2 games. Because if you guys think about it, in the original God of Wars, they had a lot of build-up time. When you got to Zeus, you really wanted to kill Zeus. When you got to anyone for that matter, you saw Hercules. People know who Hercules is. They knew who they were fighting. There was a lot of things they could work with those original games because they built up to them, from the first God of War to the second God of War to the third God of War. That's why, because of the build-up from the first 2 God of Wars, they were able to jump straight into the third God of War, just killing Poseidon the way they did. I think that might be the biggest issue when it comes to the story of these newer games. Now, the story was fantastic. I do have nitpicks on it. Like I said, there were things towards the end of the game that I was not feeling too much, but as far as the overall game, the game is amazing. It really is. I recommend all you guys buying it. It's worth $70. Don't wait for this game. If you have a PlayStation 4 or 5, I would probably wait for a 5. That's probably just me. I don't know how this game would run on the PS4. It probably runs the loading screens I couldn't even imagine. But if you have a PlayStation 5, go buy this. Don't wait to go buy this. You know, go on your store right now. You know, go ahead and I'll give you guys a couple seconds and buy this game, because stuff like this needs to be supported, so it shows we want more stuff like this. God of War Ragnarok is more 2018, and there's no hiding that. A lot of people like to call it like DLC. There's nothing wrong with being an over glorified DLC if it's what you wanted originally. 2018 was one of the best games that came out last generation, and to be honest with you, God of War Ragnarok is probably one of the best games that's going to come out this generation, because they stuck to what did very well. They improved it on fan feedback, and they did more and capitalized on everything else. And that's why I think this game is great on story for the most part, amazing on gameplay, and you know, it looks good. It looks really good. It's a very eye candy looking game, and I think you guys will enjoy this. But that's it for the review, man. Did this get the iron seal of approval from Iron Lords Podcast? And I will actually say it definitely got that seal. It got the seal of approval from us. I really enjoyed this, and I hope that we see more in the future when it comes to God of War, because it is definitely one of the franchises that I've grown up with and I really enjoy. And until next time, this is Lord Addict from Iron Lords Podcast. We are on Twitter at Iron Lords Podcast. Definitely catch us every Sunday at 1 p.m. and every Wednesday at 5 p.m. That's my own show. Every Sunday at 1 p.m. is the Iron Lords Podcast, the main show, and every Wednesday at 5 p.m. is my show, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And until next time, this is Lord Addict. I'm out of here. Peace.